Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
My oh my, welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. Let's get started because there is a lot of dumbassery in the news today that quite frankly, I think you're going to enjoy it. So you know that over the course of my radio career and in the podcast, I have talked about whether or not we are in a civil war, whether or not we are close to a civil war, and whether or not there is that Archduke Ferdinand moment, some tipping point that causes us to actually take arms against fellow Americans. And as I've said, I think that the split in the country is serious. I think the split is such that I'm not really sure that there is a way to bring the country back together because those on the left are espousing Marxist ideas. They have the microphone right now. They're getting the most attention. And I kind of thought, naively I guess, that Joe Biden would be that guy that would kind of move the Democrats a little bit back. Now, I mean, not to the center. If the center is on a ruler, if the center is 6 inches on a 12-inch ruler, I thought Joe Biden might bring the Democrats back to a 3 or a 4. Because most of the Democrats right now are espousing utterly, unequivocally communist, Marxist, fascist ideology. In their policies, in their language, in the statements that they make, that's how far to the left they have gone. So I thought, seriously, if you're going to run for president, you want to try to get those on the right, maybe, that are questionable. On the 6-inch marker, they're maybe at a 6 or they're wavering. They can't decide whether to go to a 4 or a 7, but they're in the middle. So you want to get them. Well, forget all of that. Just forget it. I think we have really reached the point where we are coming up on a revolution. Biden suggests that it's time to start a physical revolution, that it's time for a brass knuckle fight. Now, I've never heard of a brass knuckle fight. Now, I've heard of getting down to brass tacks, and I've heard of brass knuckles, but a brass knuckle fight I've never heard used as a euphemism for something other than we're going to have a fisticuff fight. We're going to get down and fight. Well, remember yesterday I told you I played a soundbite where Joe Biden was at the Poor People's Campaign. Don't ask. Hashtag Poor People's Campaign if you want to try to find it. Don't waste your time. The same people, the same 3 people that were on the stage with him, apparently asked him, well,
how would you get past either a majority Republican Senate in which Mitch McConnell was determined to kill all of these ideas, or even a Mitch McConnell in the minority who repeated the consistent filibustering that happened when you were vice president, and anything that came from the Obama-Biden administration, Mitch McConnell considered dead on arrival?
Joy, I know you're one of the ones that think it's naive to think we have to work together. The fact of the matter is, if we can't get a consensus, nothing happens except the abuse of power by the executive. 0. Number 1. Number 2, there are certain things where it just takes a brass knuckle fight. There's no way to do it. And so, folks, look, if you start off with the notion there's nothing you can do, well, why don't you all go home then, man? Or let's start a real physical revolution if you're talking about it. Because we have to be able to change what we're doing within our system because...
Now, I don't know if he's trying to backtrack by saying you have to be able to change what we're doing within our system. But if you go back to this point, he says this.
Joy, I know you're one of the ones that think it's naive to...
Now he's referring to Joy Reid, who is an MSNBC commentator. She's in the news media. And he's about to say, let me back it up just a little bit. He is about to say to her,
Joy, I know you're one of the ones that think it's naive to think we have to work together.
I know that you know that you're naive, that you're not naive in thinking that we need to work together. Well, what does that, in a different phraseology, mean? Joe Biden is saying, I know that you know that we don't have to work together. And then?
The fact of the matter is, if we can't get a consensus, nothing happens except the abuse of power by the executive. Zero. Number one. Number two, there are certain things where it just takes a brass knuckle fight. There's no way to do it. And so, folks, look, if you start off with the notion there's nothing you can do, well, why don't you all go home then, man? Or let's start a real physical revolution if you're talking about it. Because we have to be able to change what we're doing within our system because...
I take him at his word. And I really think that they're not thinking about what they are saying, or they are thinking exactly about what they're saying, and they're actually advocating the use of violence against Republicans in order to stop what they perceive as being, I guess, some sort of tyrannical dictator that's in the White House. Now, I find that notion hilarious, that we have a tyrannical dictator in the White House, because the next soundbite you're about to hear is from a tweet that I saw on Tuesday that sent my blood pressure into the stratosphere. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Now, I think one of two things are going to happen here. I saw some polling yesterday. I forget who was doing the polling. I didn't put much credence in it, but the poll showed that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's negative ratings in her congressional district in Queens are through the roof. People don't like her, and people are mad at her for having killed the Amazon deal, which instead of going to New York ended up going to Washington, D.C. I don't know whether the poll is accurate, not accurate. I didn't see the tabs, so I don't know what the questions were. But just on a surface level, if there's any credence to the poll at all, it plays into my belief that she might be overplaying her hand, which is what revolutionaries do. They come in, they feel like, believe like they have an opening, so they're going to push the envelope, not just to the edge of the table, they're going to push the envelope off the table, because in her words, as you've heard her say before, she really does want to see the transformation of America into a Marxist state. Now, they call it democratic socialism, but we got to be honest. They call it that because that's nice, fluffy language, democratic socialism, blah, blah, blah. What it really is Marxism. But here's what she said that sent me through the roof.
The United States is running concentration camps on our southern border. And that is exactly what they are. They are concentration camps. And if that doesn't bother you, we can have, okay, whatever. I want to talk to the people that are concerned enough with humanity to say that we should not, that never again means something. And that the fact that concentration camps are now an institutionalized practice in the home of the free is extraordinarily disturbing. And we need to do something about it. This week, immigrant children were moved to the same internment camps where the Japanese were held.
Hey, I got to stop it right there. We still have about 40 seconds to go, but I got to stop it here. When she says that just this week, migrant children were moved to the same facility as one of the Japanese internment camps during World War II, she's referring to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, a military base in southwest Oklahoma. A lot of you military guys and gals will remember Fort Sill. Not exactly the garden spot of America, but nonetheless, it is an Army base. It is an Air Force base. It is a military facility. It is not a concentration camp. In the 40s, it may have been used as an internment camp, but even an internment camp is not the same as a concentration camp. And if you look at Fort Sill today, even though it may not be, Joint Base Andrews, one of the greatest facilities in our military complex, but it's certainly not it's not, I was going to say it's not Guantanamo, but Guantanamo isn't even a concentration camp. Let's just let her finish. But I just want you to stop and think she's comparing a current Army base, which, by the way, I find interesting because during Hurricane Katrina, one of the things that we did was we converted Louis Armstrong International Airport into a mobile hospital, into a MASH unit, so that we could treat people. And we ended up keeping people in tents on the tarmacs, and to some degree, we couldn't really use the terminal facilities that well, but to some degree inside the terminal facilities. But we actually did use tents, because when you have a catastrophic event, when you have tens of thousands of people in which you have to provide food, clothing, shelter, medical care, you can't put them in the Four Seasons. You can't put them in, I don't know, you cannot take them. And you got to remember, you also have to remember, these are migrant children under the age of 18. What are we supposed to do? Just take these 18-year-old kids, 17-year-old, 16-year-old, 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and just give them a bus ticket? Hey, kid, where do you want to go? I don't know. First of all, he probably can't speak English. Well, I don't know. Here, take this ink pen. Here's a map of the United States. Close your eyes and just pick some place, and we'll give you a bus ticket there. So they end up in Schenectady. They end up in Columbus. They end up in Las Vegas. They end up in Los Angeles. They end up in Denver. We would be vilified for doing that. I would vilify our government for doing that. We have to process these kids. We have to process these migrants. Otherwise, we might as well just be honest and just say there are no borders. Just shut the borders down. But let me get back to AOC.
In the earlier 20th century, and this is not even about a crisis. That concentration camps are now institutionalized is extraordinarily disturbing. To the same internment camps where the Japanese were held in the earlier 20th century, and not even about a crisis.
That's enough. You get the gist. I guess my question is, can somebody please get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez a history book so that she can learn what the concentration camps were like? You know, comparing our borders centers, comparing military bases to camps where millions were gassed to death is not just reckless and utterly false, but it is scary because she has millions of followers. Now, when I looked at this video yesterday, it had 500,000 views. Now, not all 500,000 people are going to agree with what she said, but when you have millions of followers, you have great influence. And she's able to, with her lies and with her absolute mischaracterization of what we're doing with migrant children, comparing them to concentration camps, is reckless and it's irresponsible. So then once she got attacked on Twitter for it, what do you think the response was? She doubled down. She doubled down by tweeting this. And for the shrieking Republicans who do not know the difference, concentration camps are not the same as death camps. Concentration camps are considered by experts as, quote, the mass detentions of civilians without trial. And that's exactly what this administration is doing, she said. And she quoted a piece from Esquire magazine, which I just happen to have right in front of me. If I can get rid of this stupid advertising, I can, I've seen all the movies. Here we go. The headline is, an expert on concentration camps says that's exactly what the U.S. is running at the border. This is written by somebody by the name of Jack Holmes back on June 13. I don't know who Jack Holmes is. Let's see if it says down here who he is. Well, it's a long article. I'm not going to get to it. I'm not going to scroll all the way through. But I do want to just read quickly from the beginning of the story. Surely, he writes, the United States of America could not operate concentration camps. In the American consciousness, the term is synonymous with the Nazi death machines across the European continent that the Allies began the process of dismantling 75 years ago this month. But while the world historical horrors of the Holocaust are unmatched, they are only the most extreme and inhuman manifestation of a concentration camp system which, according to Andrea Pitzer, author of One Long Night, A Global History of Concentration Camps, has a more global definition. There have been concentration camps in France, South Africa, Cuba, the Soviet Union, and, with Japanese internment, the United States. In fact, she contends we are operating such a system right now in response to a very real spike in arrivals at our southern border. Pitzer says, quote, we have what I would call a concentration camp system, and the definition of that in my book is mass detention of civilians without trial. Seriously? That's not the definition I would use. And in fact, I'm always curious what the online dictionary says. Concentration camp's a noun, a place where large numbers of people, especially political prisoners or members of persecuted minorities, none of which migrants fit either one of those categories, are deliberately imprisoned in a relatively small area with inadequate facilities. That's not Fort Sill. Sometimes to provide forced labor, not Fort Sill, or to await mass execution, not Fort Sill. The term is most strongly associated with the several hundred camps established by the Nazis in Germany and occupied Europe in 1933 to 1945, among the most infamous being Dachau, Belsen, and Auschwitz. Orwell. I hate to keep referring to Orwell, but this is the stage where we've got. We have reached the point where Joe Biden, the guy that I thought would be the one to kind of pull Democrats back to the center, is out here on the left, are advocating violence. It's time to have a brass knuckles fight. It's time to start a physical revolution because we just can't come together. And we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez accusing us of operating concentration camps because we have an inflow of illegal aliens. Let me say the phrase again. Illegal aliens, illegally, improperly, without authorization, whatever term you want to use from the statute, crossing the border into the United States. Many of whom, at least remember from a podcast a couple of days ago, 52,000 of whom migrant minor children. Of course, we're going to put them in facilities. I don't want to sit here and play semantics all day, but I do want to say that if we have a Democrat Party that is accusing Republicans and this administration of operating concentration camps, then game over. There are no more rules. There's no more trying to be polite, reasonable, rational. Maybe Joe Biden's right. It's just time for a physical revolution. Now, I think that the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes have reached a point in the political season because you got to remember, put all of this in the context that we are in the middle of a presidential campaign. So I don't know which direction that someone like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her ilk are going to go. The Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warrens, the AOCs, all of these people who are espousing all of these socialist, Marxist, fascist ideas, are they going to come out on top? Or God, I can't believe I'm going to say this, are people like Nancy Pelosi that I think is bat crap crazy, are they going to come out on top? Is the traditional Democratic leadership going to come out on top? Or are these new revolutionaries that now apparently include, 172-year-old Joe Biden, are they going to include them too? If they are, and we are just now at the beginning of the presidential election season, One, you better get a big-ass bag of popcorn. You better get a whole bunch of Diet Coke or tequila or vodka or something, because it's going to be a wild ride. It's going to be an incredibly wild ride. And it's also going to be, from a scary point of view, a tipping point for this country. Because let me just do a little fear-mongering. If Democrats win, they win the presidency, they keep the House, and they take the Senate, and these revolutionaries take over, and they start pushing the Green New Deal. They just open the borders. We just I don't know, remember, she wants to abolish ICE. So we abolish Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. If we just open the borders, we become a borderless nation. We become Europe. In fact, we become Europe so fast, and we are speeding so fast down that road of so-called Democrat socialism that I think that even in my lifetime, we reach a point where the country turns to pure Marxism. And it will be over. It will be over, depending on how the outcome of the next great American Civil War turns out. Holy cow. What a way to start out a podcast. But I could not let you not go without hearing what Biden and AOC had to say. Grab your popcorn. Remember yesterday I played the quick soundbite of Eric Swalwell, the Democrat from California that's running for president, that I think is at 0% in the polls. Well, I didn't realize that speech that he was giving outside the National Rifle Association in Fairfax, Virginia. And apparently about 18 people attended. 18 people. Here's what I suggest that Eric Swalwell might want to do. Rather than giving a speech about gun control in front of the National Rifle Association, why don't you instead go give a speech about knife control in front of Sur La Table? Find a really nice kitchen store, Williams-Sonoma, Sur La Table, I don't care, and give a speech about how we need knife control because there are too many people killing other people with knives. Or, since Joe Biden has said you're going to cure cancer, why don't you go to a cancer center and stand outside a cancer center and announce, because this is just about how cynical I think it is, announcing that you're going to run for president and you're going to cure cancer. Why don't you go stand outside a cancer center as patients and their families are going in and out to see their oncologist or to get treatment and announce that you're going to cure cancer if you elect me? We have this is, oh my God, it's so stupid. 18 people. Yeah, I think it's time. Truthfully, that's embarrassing. You're a Democrat presidential hopeful. You're entitled to that title because you are a Democrat, you are running for president, and you are hopeful that you get the nomination, and you're hopeful that you're going to win. Trump is gathering tens of thousands of people for his announcement, and you get 18? Yeah, I think it's time to go to Sur La Table. Well, Sur La Table, because most of those are in the pedestrian malls where you can be outside. Most of the Williams-Sonoma, I think, shops are inside shopping malls. So go do your knife control speech outside of Sur La Table. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I told you so. Remember when I told you that O.J. Simpson had, which I find sick in and of itself, but O.J. Simpson had opened a Twitter account. By the way, let me just Twitter. See, this is kind of like live radio. I could actually pause this and look it up, but I'm not going to do it. O.J. Simpson. So here's O.J., the real O.J. 32. Here's what I think is really sick about our society. O.J. Simpson has now been on for 3 or 4 days, maybe a week at the most. And he already has 723,000 followers on Twitter. What I wouldn't give for 723,000 followers. Well, I wouldn't go kill my ex-wife. I wouldn't murder the kid that was bringing the glasses back. I wouldn't do anything like that. But I wouldn't mind having 723,000 followers on Twitter. But as I mentioned, or as I said, how long do you think it will take before OJ starts drunk tweeting? Well, I guess I should have taken the bet. The New York Post reports O.J. Simpson's Twitter account allegedly sent a series of menacing direct messages, including a string of 16 knife emojis and the warning that, in all quotes and in all caps, "I will find your ass and cut you." He sent that to a parody account that skewers the disgraced football star over his acquittal in the 1994 slayings of ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. The New York Post continues, the shocking threats were contained in a pair of videos posted on the @KillerOJ Simpson Twitter page on Monday of this week, which also marked the 25th anniversary of the infamous slow-speed police chase of a white Ford Bronco that ended with Simpson's arrest on murder charges. I want to add a parenthetical. You know, the only reason that I knew that it was the anniversary on Monday of that chase was because I happened to be coming back from a meeting. So I'm flipping through the radio dial, and somebody, I won't say who, but there was somebody that played, apparently because I kept waiting for a break. Like, are you going to break in here and tell us what you're doing? They were playing the entire conversation between OJ and I forget what his buddy's name, trying to get OJ to turn himself in. And I thought, really, that's the best you can do for radio, is to replay all of that? You know, Simpson was admittedly, shockingly, acquitted on racial grounds, although he was later found liable for the murder of the victims in civil court. In a wrongful death case, the jury did find him civilly liable for those deaths. Now, since OJ is still on parole for armed robbery, his parole officer might want to look into this. In the meantime, whoever is running the parody account @KillerOJ Simpson had better keep his head down. OJ has killed before over less. You know, the whole thing is probably fake. But then again, the parody account is obviously fake. But there's not any doubt, at least in my mind today, that the OJ account with the 723,000 followers is real. And I've watched a video of the direct messages in which he did send the string of knife emojis and the warning that I will find your ass and cut you to that parody account. So the video doesn't lie, unless of course it's a deep fake video, which I seriously doubt. So my prediction about OJ drunk tweeting, only half correct. He may not have been drunk, but he sure as hell is tweeting. So I don't know whether you have a MasterCard or not, but I always thought that preventing fraud was important to the credit card companies. But apparently preventing fraud is not nearly as important as so-called virtue signaling by pandering trendily to transsexuals. That's why MasterCard will now let the sexually perplexed put made-up names on their cards, fake names. The story says, MasterCard will allow transgender people to use their chosen names on credit and debit cards in an effort to combat discrimination at the cash register. Discrimination. I know what you think of discrimination. I know what I think of discrimination. But discrimination is what the liberals call it when transsexuals fail to receive instant groveling gratification of even their most imperious and unreasonable demands. I don't want someone to look at the name on the card and then look at me and be confused. So I can use my chosen name, my fake name, on my credit card in order to combat discrimination. That is the height of virtue signaling. Because think about it, what could possibly go wrong? I mean, other than, purse snatchers putting on wigs to go with their 5-day beards and shopping with the stolen cards. Think about that. Other adventures in social justice warfare by MasterCard have included things like blacklisting people for being disliked by the intolerant Jacobins like Color of Change. And this is really bizarre but true. Corporate America, let's be honest. It used to be that Republicans are the party of big business in corporate America. Well, if that's true, how do you explain this? Corporate America has embraced the ultra-far left. They have embraced all of this dumbassery. And given what the lefties do to capitalists once they have power, you know those suits in the boardroom must be hoping that the crocodile eats them last. MasterCard. I don't remember what there's got to be some MasterCard commercial somewhere that we can make a parody out of. Yes, when you don't want to use your real name and you want to commit fraud, we'll let you get a MasterCard. So Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, the Muslim and anti-Semite congresswoman from Minnesota, her congressional district has according to the FBI, it is the number one source of Islamic terrorist recruitment in the United States. How convenient. How convenient that an anti-Semite Muslim congresswoman, a radical far-left Marxist Islamist, that her congressional district has the highest rate of Islamic terrorist recruitment in the United States. So a reporter by the name of Nicholas Balazi, I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, caught Congressman Omar as she was walking to her office in one of the House office buildings to ask her about it.
Minnesota's 5th Congressional District reportedly has the highest rate of terrorist recruitment in the U.S. I caught up with Congresswoman Omar, who represents that district, to ask her about that statistic.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about the FBI saying that your district has the highest rate of terrorist recruitment. Your specific district, what are you doing? What steps are you taking to deter extremism and recruitment by terrorist organizations going on in your district?
I have not seen that report.
Yes, FBI stats, but in general, what steps are you taking? What is your message to people who may want to join one of those groups within your district, terrorist groups?
Oh. So what is your message to individuals in your congressional district that might want to join an ISIS or other Islamic terrorist organization? Silence. If you are a member of the United States Congress and you can't turn to a reporter and say, the message to my constituents is this: we live in the greatest country in the history of civilization. I would implore you to not join these radical Islamic terrorist organizations. It will lead to your death. It doesn't lead to martyrdom. It goes against everything that we as Muslims believe in. Hang on, I'm choking up here. There, I got that little silly thing out of my throat. That we as Muslims do not believe in. How easy would it have been for her to do that? And instead, just silence. Campus Reform is out with a story that I think is really worth everybody thinking about for a minute. It starts out this way. A recent study found that more than 2/3 of U.S. college students said their college campus environments prevent people from expressing beliefs due to the possibility of seeming offensive. The Knight Foundation and College Pulse did this study, and they found that 68% of college students say that the, quote, climate on my campus prevents some people from saying things that they believe because others might find them offensive. And then Gallup did a separate poll that was released last year that showed the same results, that roughly about 2/3 of recent college grads didn't feel comfortable sharing opinions in class that didn't align with the majority. So this month, Gallup noted that it had surveyed graduates who had obtained their bachelor's degree from 2013 to 2018, and they asked them to respond to this statement. Quote, in fact, I would just ask you, how would you respond to this statement? I felt very comfortable sharing ideas or opinions in class, or for you, I would ask, at work or at home or in social settings. I felt very comfortable sharing ideas or opinions in class that were probably only held by a minority of people. So then they were asked to use a scale from 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree and 5 being strongly agree. They were then supposed to rate how well they aligned with that statement. And the poll found that only a third of those surveys stated that they strongly agree that they were comfortable sharing a minority perspective in class. A full 64% of grads indicated they agreed with the statement, while only 14% suggested that they disagreed. What are we doing on college campuses? Where you're supposed to have this academic environment, where you're supposed to have the clash of ideas, where you're supposed to be able to wonder out loud. Well, professor, what about this? Or why do people believe that? Or why is that true? Or, where did you get that statistic? Or are you certain about that? Or what's the methodology of this or that? It's actually just the opposite, in that people are afraid. 70% wish for a learning environment open to all speech and viewpoints. Now, I recognize that there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect because if you read everything in the media, you would seem to think that most of these rugrats that are going to college are actually just mind-numbed robots regurgitating whatever their professors are, shoveling into their brains, and they're not thinking about this. Versus this poll that says a full 70% of those polled really wanted a learning environment that was open to all speech and viewpoints. It makes you really wonder which one is true. I had the most fascinating conversation with my grandson at Father's Day lunch this past Sunday. And he was telling me about a conversation he had. He's in a couple of, he's actually, I think, in too many advanced placement classes, but as long as his grades are good, that's fine. But he was telling me about an argument that he was having with a teacher over a book that he was told to read, in which it's a story about as he described it, a Latino girl growing up in Chicago that feels like she's put upon and she has no chance of advancement. And once he told me the premise of, or the storyline, the plot, he ignored that and went straight to the writer, the author, and said that the author is clearly just regurgitating, repeating kind of lines that you would hear in the news or elsewhere, and is not really giving you what he perceived to believe, a vivid description of how this person might really believe and how she might live. And I asked him, so when you told your teacher that you disagreed not only with the premise of the book, but you disagreed with how the author had written it, that it was poorly written, it was boring and it wasn't very vivid or great detail, what was your teacher's response? And I was so excited to hear him say, she challenged me, but she agreed. The teacher agreed. In fact, my guess, I didn't take the conversation this far, but it crossed my mind that the teacher specifically assigned that book to see how many kids in the class would find the book to be trite, uninspiring, and full of a bunch of tropes. And I think my grandson found it. It's encouraging to me to find any place, whether it be in high school, whether it be on a college campus. It encourages me anytime when I find either students or professors who are saying that, I really do want a more open environment. I really do want to be able to express what I believe without having to worry about whether or not it's going to offend somebody. Touché for them. We need more of that. I probably should save this to get Christian Toto's take on it, but according to the Free Beacon, the Broadway production of a play about Bill and Hillary Clinton talking frankly about her 2008 presidential campaign is going to close a month ahead of schedule because of low ticket sales. Apparently it stars Laurie Metcalf and John Lithgow. It was set to close on July 21st, but instead will close July 23rd. It cost $4.2 million to produce. According to The Hollywood Reporter, Hillary and Clinton is not based on the real Clintons, but instead characters with the same name in an alternate universe. And its early closing is linked to underwhelming ticket sales. whatever. Nobody cares. Just go away. Well, nobody cares except for this. The State Department has revealed this week that it has identified, quote, multiple security incidents involving current or former employees handling of Hillary Clinton's emails, and that 23 violations and 7 infractions have been issued as part of the department's ongoing investigation. That came in a letter to Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, who is responsible for overseeing the security review. Mary Elizabeth Taylor, the State Department's Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Legislative Affairs, wrote this to Chairman Grassley. To this point, the department has assessed the culpability to 15 individuals, some of whom were culpable in multiple security incidents. DS, the Department of State, has issued 23 violations and 7 infraction incidents. This number will likely change as the review progresses. The State Department called the matter serious, said it expected to conclude the investigation by September 1, acknowledging it was taking a long time to do it because it was so time-consuming because of the volume of emails. Here we are, 2019, and the Hillary Clinton email scandal is still in the news, and the investigation is still ongoing. You know, I think this is part of why. Suddenly, think about this. Has anybody heard from James Comey lately? The former director of the FBI? He's just kind of disappeared into the woodwork. He's not appearing on any TV stations. When I go through my clipping service, I can't find any sound bites from him. You look at his Twitter account, it's these inane, inspirational tweets about, doing the best that you can be and the best that you can be, a bunch of BS. I think these people have gone to ground. I think Clapper, Brennan, Comey, I think Strzok, Page, I think McCabe, I think all of these people are beginning to hide because of the investigation that Barr has turned over to that U.S. attorney from Massachusetts. Or was it Connecticut? I forget. Anyway, the U.S. attorney that has been doing all this incredible work rooting out corruption in the federal government. I think, and here's the only thing that scares me about this investigation is the timeline. We don't have much time because there is no guarantee, and don't believe the polls right now. I mean, every poll at this stage, whether it was George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, or Ronald Reagan, or anybody else, they were all behind in the polls, so don't worry about the polls. But what I do truly worry about is the re-election of Donald Trump versus the election of any Democrat. The election of any Democrat, if this investigation is still ongoing, will bring that investigation to a screeching halt. I don't know how fast they can work, and I don't know how quickly, if there are actually going to be indictments, they can either do indictments or reports. But they got to work fast. They've got to work incredibly fast. I don't prejudge, and I am not a member of the investigation, so I can say this. I truly hope, that this investigation reveals that the Obama administration, whether it's the president, whether it's Susan Rice, whether it's Hillary Clinton, I hope this investigation reveals that the Obama administration used the power of the government to spy on a presidential campaign, and that they used the power of the government to start the Russian investigation, not the Russian collusion, but the obstruction of justice. I hope we find that they use the powers of government to do that, because that will show the corruption and will bring these people down. And they deserve to be brought down. And we shouldn't be surprised if that's where the investigation takes us, because we already know that they use the Internal Revenue Service to shut down conservative groups. We already know they use the Department of Justice to spy on reporters. It's time to bring these people to justice. I think it was yesterday I told you the story about Kyle Kushoff, the young man that was a Parkland, Marjorie Stoneman school shooting in Parkland, Florida. He was one of the survivors, but he was also one of those that came out in favor of the Second Amendment and said that restricting guns was not going to do anything to improve school safety. Anyway, he appeared on the Daily Caller News Foundation to issue a video apology. It's about 4 minutes long, and I'm not going to play the entire 4 minutes, because in the beginning he talks about, he's not trying to make excuses. He's he's communicated with Harvard. He's asked for a meeting with Harvard to show that he is not the person that he was 2 years ago prior to the shooting, that the shooting has matured him and changed him in ways that he doesn't even recognize the person that he was when he was 16 years old. You can imagine anybody going through a similar traumatic event would probably feel exactly the same way. You know, there's the before the event and after the event, depending on exactly how traumatic it is and how you respond to that trauma. But what I want you to hear is I want you to hear him talk about the society that we now live in.
The reason I'm in this position is because my school went through something so terrible, and I've been working every day since to make sure no other community goes through that. So after Harvard had sent me a letter rescinding my admission, I said, look, I followed up with another email asking for an in-person meeting. I said, look, I want to come face-to-face and explain myself, apologize and clarify, and double down and show that the person who said those things, I am not that person today. So far removed. You know, after the shooting, I've changed, I've matured so much that I don't even recognize the person who said those things. And they refused to grant me an in-person meeting. I don't believe Harvard is an institution that is racist, that is bigoted, that is sexist. I don't think that, because I think that institutions can grow and people can change. This isn't about me anymore. It's whether we live in a society where people can grow, where people can change.
It's not about me anymore. It's about whether we live in a society where, and I would add institutions. He says whether individuals can learn and grow from their past mistakes, or whether we're always going to confine people to, you are always going to be judged by your last worst act, and we're never going to allow anybody to rehabilitate themselves or to grow and change. I think that is, for an 18-year-old kid, I think that is an incredibly mature question. And I think it's something that in this modern age of social media where we, you know, if we're taking a dump or we're eating dinner or whatever we're doing, we have to put everything on social media. Or conversely, if you're, and in fact, probably not, I was going to say if you're outside your home, you're being recorded. But in many people's homes, you're being recorded. Are we going to live in a society where there is no longer any privacy, and anything and everything that you ever say and do is at some point going to become public knowledge, whether you want it to become public knowledge or not? Or whether you just wanted to live your life in kind of a nice, quiet obscurity, or because of circumstances beyond your control, you actually end up in the public eye as this kid did. He's a 16-year-old teenager in high school. Do you think that on the day before the shooting that he was thinking to himself, gee, I just wish something really traumatic would happen to me so that I could go on and become famous and then, you know, get rejected by Harvard and then everybody be talking about my apology and I could talk about how I've grown? No, he wasn't thinking about that. He probably wasn't even thinking about going to Harvard 2 years ago.
Or do we live in a society where past mistakes forever, brand you as irredeemable, as Harvard did for me? I actually gave up a lot of big scholarships in order to go to Harvard. And people ask me, what are you going to do now with Harvard? I don't really know yet. I haven't decided. So all the options are on the table. One of the most surprising things is how hard the left, the liberal left, has been responding to this and saying, whoa, this is insane. We should still be able to live in a society where kids can grow and kids can change. And past mistakes don't forever brand you as irredeemable. And it's really been those people who have been really hitting Harvard and saying, you guys kowtow to the mob and you guys acted incorrectly. And that the only reason why this is happening is because there are people who are vindictive and are trying to destroy me because they know they can't destroy my argument, so they go against the person. Everyone makes mistakes. I can't undo what I did, but I can work to earn that forgiveness. I want to right this wrong. I wish I could have unsaid those things. And it's not because of how I've been getting hit by the media. It's because I genuinely am sorry. The person who said those things before is not the person you see in front of you today. I've grown and I've changed so much. I just want to reiterate one last time that I'm sorry to each of every single one of you. I can't take back what I said in the past, but I can work to earn your forgiveness.
Are we going to live in a society where you are forever confined to your last worst mistake? Or are we going to allow people to grow and redeem themselves and to go on to live productive lives? Well, I can tell you, as one individual who was vilified by the media, that I refuse to be judged by any of my last worst acts, and that I believe that we should allow people to redeem themselves. But I think the more we become enamored with social media, the more we become enamored with celebrity, the more we become enamored with everybody getting their Andy Warhol 15 minutes of fame, the more people like Kyle Kashuv are going to be the unintended victims of our desire to destroy everybody. And I think that's wrong. Speaking of unintended consequences or unintended victims, I find this next story absolutely hilarious. Monday of this week, New Mexico Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham, the current governor of New Mexico, announced on Twitter that because of the, quote, ongoing humanitarian crisis at the southern border, that New Mexico is going to be suing the Trump administration because apparently she claims the Trump administration is indiscriminately releasing migrants in communities in the state's borderland area. Now, she filed the lawsuit in conjunction with Albuquerque. The goal of the lawsuit, according to her press release, is to ensure that New Mexico border communities are not unfairly overburdened and that asylum-seeking individuals and families are not left without basic necessities. Now, the city and the state both allege that they have been, quote, profoundly impacted by the Trump administration's decision back in October to cancel the safe release policy. If you're not familiar with that, that is a 10-year-old practice that coordinates transportation for asylum seekers into the interior of the country, where they would remain until their court hearing. Of course, we know they won't appear, but that was the idea. Now, San Diego, which like Albuquerque is a sanctuary city, filed a similar motion in April complaining that asylum seekers were staying put and that the taxpayers of San Diego were having to foot the bill. And then San Diego politicians got pissed off about it because, wait a minute, these people are wanting to come to San Diego, they're wanting to stay here, you're releasing them into the community, and then they end up on our social welfare system and we have to pay for it, and the taxpayers of San Diego are sick of it. Now, what I find absolutely hilarious, Lujan Grisham is pleading for assistance to deal with a humanitarian crisis. That is the exact same woman who back in January confidently asserted after a visit to the border that, quote, I have not seen anything to indicate that we have an emerging crisis here at the border. She's also the same governor that decided to pull out all of the New Mexico National Guard troops that were helping CBP and ICE on the New Mexico border with Mexico. She pulled all of those out, and now she's upset. Now you get border apprehensions that average more than 60,000 a month at the time. She and her plan to withdraw most of the, and it was only 200 National Guardsmen, but still 200 National Guardsmen is 200 National Guardsmen. So she withdraws the Guardsmen. She makes Albuquerque and New Mexico sanctuary cities. Well, she doesn't make Albuquerque. Albuquerque does that on their own. But Albuquerque and New Mexico both become sanctuary cities and sanctuary states, respectively. She withdraws National Guard troops. And then when the border is flooded and all of these people start showing up and just landing in border communities and staying and becoming a burden on those communities, then she decides to sue the Trump administration. She is suing over the border crisis that she helped create. At some point, I don't know what, but at some point, some of these Yahoo politicians are going to have to recognize that if we have a humanitarian crisis, it is because they failed to secure the border. If we have a humanitarian crisis, it is because we have a program of catch and release. If we have a humanitarian crisis, it is because we have refused to reform the asylum program. All of this falls squarely at the feet of politicians at the federal, at the state, and dare I say at the local level, to sue over a border crisis that she created. You know, I love New Mexico. In fact, I wish I was doing the podcast today from there, but I'm not, but maybe later in the week I will be. But my point is, I can't escape it. I can sit here in my studio in Colorado, and I can look at all the dumbassery going on around here. Or I can go to New Mexico, and I can sit down there and I can watch the New Mexico news, and I can watch read about all the dumbassery going on around there. There's no escaping the dumbassery in this country. And when you look at the dumbassery, first and foremost, to paint a broad brush, that dumbassery is created by politicians at every level of government, federal, state, county, local. It is then caused by politicians on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. It is then caused predominantly by Republicans that don't have a spine and Democrats who are at their very most basic level, Marxists. The dumbassery is everywhere, and I'm sick of it. Let's get a taxpayer relief shot in. This comes to us from Renton, Washington.
The bar manager tells me she was on the phone with 911 as this was all happening. Surveillance video from inside the bar captured several different angles. From this camera, you see a man wearing a dark sweatshirt and the hood over his head. The man paces back and forth. Take a closer look and you can see a knife with a long blade in his hand. According to Renton PD, when officers got to Cheers Sports Bar and Grill just after 10 p.m. Saturday night, they found someone outside waving a knife and threatening to hurt people. That man ran into the bar and officers followed him inside. Inside, that man began threatening customers. In the video, the man with the knife runs off camera as he lunges at a bar patron. Witnesses say the man stabbed a stranger in the arm. And then an officer shot and killed the man with the knife. None of the bar staff recognize that man. They've never seen him in or around the bar before. Police haven't identified the man killed or the bar patron who was stabbed in the arm. That stabbing victim is expected to make a full recovery.
Well, clearly we need common sense knife legislation. Otherwise, these kinds of things wouldn't happen. You know, the other thing I find fascinating about this is I know there are people that when they listen to taxpayer relief shots think, oh, I really wish Michael wouldn't do those. You know, people end up getting killed. I'm not celebrating the fact that somebody got killed. I'm celebrating the fact that, one, people are able to defend themselves. And two, I'm pointing out that more often than not, in fact, probably, 99% of the time, when you have an officer-involved shooting, it's a legitimate shooting. In this case, you've got a guy, and you can't see it on the photograph, but he has what appears to be at least, I'm guessing, a 8 to 10-inch blade that he's walking around with. He has already stabbed victims in this bar. He has lunged at patrons, and the cops are supposed to what? Okay, all right. I know we brought a gun to a knife fight. Let us put our guns down. We'll get a knife, and then we'll have it out, okay? No. You wouldn't do that. Why would you expect a cop to do that? And thus ends the taxpayer relief shots of this episode. And then finally, just for a little perspective. You know, we started out this entire podcast with Joe Biden talking about a physical revolution and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talking about how, you know, we have concentration camps in this country. I'm still looking for the Auschwitz of America, but I haven't found it yet. I'd like to take her to China. China tells us that they have stopped the practice of forced organ harvesting from prisoners. They claim that they stopped doing it back in 2015. But apparently this independent tribunal in the United Kingdom has found that the killing of prisoners in China for organ transplants is continuing. In fact, there's evidence to suggest that not only is it continuing, but it's on the rise. The China Tribunal reported its findings in London on Monday with the conclusion that the brutal medical practice is still ongoing and that China ought to be held accountable by the international community. No, only America is seen doing wrong in the eyes of the international community. No, China can do no wrong. The China Tribunal reports that they heard testimony from 50 witnesses. They read huge volumes of written evidence. The international team of experts in human rights, law, and medicine concluded that they are, quote, certain unanimously and sure beyond reasonable doubt that China has been carrying out the forced harvesting of organs from prisoners of conscience on a significant scale. I emphasize the phrase prisoners of conscience because they're not harvesting, well, and they may be harvesting the organs from, I don't know, a murderer or a rapist or a bank robber, but specifically they focus on prisoners of conscience. China obtains most of the organs it uses for transplants from members of the persecuted spiritual group Falun Gong, although it also uses the organs of the Uyghur Muslims, Christians, Tibetan Buddhists, and other prisoners of conscience. An estimated 1.5 million prisoners of conscience are detained in, now according to this story, detention camps and prisons across China, typically located near transplant hospitals, where they are executed on an on-demand basis if an organ is required for transplantation. And we think that America is an awful place, and we think that America has concentration camps. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, you're an ass. Not only you're an ass, you're a dumbass. Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. A reminder, iTunes. Subscribe on iTunes. You can go to the website, michaelbrowntoday.com. You can listen to us. You can stream it live at michaelbrowntoday.com. Or you can obviously join us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all of those places. You'll find the links for all of those at the website, michaelbrowntoday.com. And I really would appreciate it if you would subscribe to the YouTube page, if you would like the Facebook page, and then join the discussion group, because we're going to have another town hall in a couple of weeks, and we'll give you more advance notice so that we can get more people involved. We had a great turnout last time, but of course I want to grow everything, right? I'm a typical American capitalist. I just want to grow everything, and I need your help in doing that. So if you go to michaelbrowntoday.com, follow us on all the social media sites, greatly appreciated. If you listen to us on Spreaker, if you would be sure and follow us, help us build that following, that would be great too. Anyway, thanks for listening to this episode, and I'll be back again tomorrow.